It's like, can we not get a superhero who doesn't have motivations outside of a female co-lead? Like, do we have to have a romance for every superhero
Superhero?
film?
Yes.
Like,
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite co-hosts, Andrew, to review the second in the Spider-Man series, Spider-Man Far From Home. This was a film that was written by Chris McKenna and Eric Summers and directed by John Watts. So we're seeing some of the same faces from the first film reappearing to create this second one, but not the full list of, 10 or ish people that we had in the last one showing up for this one. And that's what we're going to be reviewing today. So, Andrew, what are your initial thoughts and rating of Spider-Man Far From Home?
my rating. Hold on, let me pull it up. Here we go. I gave it a 6.15. My initial thoughts, this movie was fun. I think it showcased Spider-Man's abilities really well in creative ways. I think the villain and the side characters are quite compelling. I think the place this movie doesn't necessarily fail, but I think its weakest link is probably actually Spider-Man as opposed to the first film and the development that he has, as well as his motivations and what drives him in the film.
Yeah, that's an interesting position to take. I will be very curious to see how that discussion goes because I went back and forth on what my thoughts were on Spider-Man as I was reviewing this, just because I think they really try in some ways to make a compelling character in this film, but there definitely isn't the same essence there that we had in the previous one. But I mean, there's nuance there, so I think I could see myself fighting for the other side a little bit, if you will, on this one. That being said, I didn't. It's a six something isn't a bad review to give to this film, and
Yeah,
this one for me was very similar to the last one that I gave a review for. In the original, I gave it a 6.95. This one got a 7.05 for me, which I was a little surprised to see it slightly higher, but it's probably around the ballpark I think it deserves, and that's because it had some things going for it in this one that we didn't have in the previous one. But we'll get to that. For those who are not familiar, though, Andrew, you want to tell the audience what Spider-Man Far From Home is about?
this movie follows the events of Endgame, with Tony Stark's death being pretty influential in Peter Parker's, modus operandi, the way he operates. And as such, he's proceeding through life trying to figure out what his place in the world is now, while also trying to be the teenager that he is and living out his high school fantasies and pursuing this girl he likes. The movie itself will take place during their trip abroad as the science, it's just like a science trip for the class. And during this trip, Nick Fury kind of hijacks their trip because there is elemental forces attacking them, and there's this new superhero, Mysterio, who turns out to be a fake, as well as the monsters, and Mysterio is just trying to hijack these glasses that Peter got from Tony Stark.
Yep, that's a pretty decent summary of it. A little bit of a spoiler there, but if you haven't seen it at this point, sorry, that's what you get in this podcast, and that's what you should expect. So we're going to plow right ahead with that opening scene. You have that opening scene where you see Nick Fury and you see the assistant lady, I'm forgetting, Maria Hill, show up at the scene of this elemental force. And then you see Mysterio, this being, come out of nowhere and start fighting this element, the Earth element. What were your thoughts on that? And then the recap that you get on the other side of everything coming back from the blip.
It's interesting because you don't have like a fight. Oh, you technically have a fight scene. It's just not the hero that the movie's about, I guess is the best way to put it. I didn't give it full points, but it was kind of middle of the road for me in terms of the opener, right? I think this film has to do something similar to the last film, where it has a lot of backstory that they kind of have to fill in for you. in order for the movie to make sense if you're just watching it by itself, because the events of Infinity War and Endgame really impact how Spider-Man moves forward with his life, and with like him and most of his classmates all disappearing for 5 years. So I think that their coverage over like the school monitor was okay. It felt very much akin though to the Fantastic Four news broadcast, where it's like, let's just cover this and give you synopsis. So I'm not a huge fan of it.
Hmm.
I think they probably could have gotten away with just having references to the blip throughout, because most likely people have seen Infinity War and Endgame at this point, considering Endgame is like one of the highest grossing films of all time. Um, and the thing is,
Sure.
you don't have to just not explain it, right? But you can do it kind of how they explain Spider-Man's backstory in for Homecoming, where it's just through like little lines of dialogue and references throughout the film. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
that
I I
go ahead.
get what you're saying, and I do agree. This is in regards to openers that I've seen. This is one of the less compelling ones, right? It gets you the basics of what you need, but it's not something that really grips you and goes, "Oh my goodness, this is what happened." And I get what you're saying. I think the big thing for me that I'm trying to get over is this idea of this 5 year time span thing, which is very specific to the MCU, and it's a kind of big thing to just try to catch people up on in a more subtle way, maybe because it's a whole event that happened in a different film that is having a big impact on this film. And I think that's why you see elements like this occur. You know, for example, with the Incredible Hulk, how did he get these powers? You need to have some sort of montage to explain why he's, well, I guess you don't really. I mean, you could have it spread out through the middle. Why is he turning green? So yeah, I see what you're saying. The blip is like a catalyst for the B plot, which is why it's. I don't know. I think you're probably right. Maybe you're right. I don't see exactly in my mind a example of how they would do that well in this case, but they probably could have, and I just haven't thought of it yet. So, anyways, let's talk about Spider-Man because that's really what we want to talk about. No one really wants to talk about the lit blip or, Avengers is for a different review. So, what are your thoughts on Spider-Man, Peter Parker, played by Tom Holland in this second film?
Spider-Man was the weak link in this film for me, like I stated previously. And I think the big issue for me is it felt like this movie was a regression from the previous one. Because in the previous film, you have a high schooler who is striving to be more. He wants to be this hero. And you never see anything in movies in between, which is Infinity War and Endgame, that say that he changed from that. But it's like in this film, not only did he lose Iron Man, and he is like has this duality of personas where one is I need to take on this responsibility. Am I going to take on this responsibility? And the other one is like I just want to be a high schooler. Whereas the previous movie was I'm beyond high school. I don't need high school anymore. I'm a friggin' Avenger. Um, and it's like we don't get any implication in the movies in between that Spider-Man doesn't want this. If anything, everything in those movies confirms that Spider-Man is just hyped to be here. Um, And so I could see it being more compelling if Spider-Man like had to live with the weight of Iron Man's death and feeling this like responsibility. I just really don't buy the I just want to be a high schooler and hang out with my girlfriend, and it feels contrived for the sake of the plot, which was just we want to have this tension between him and Nick Fury, and we want to introduce this girl MJ as his love interest that he's pursuing, and he can't because he has to take on these responsibilities as Spider-Man.
Yeah, see, I don't know if I agree with that. And the reason is twofold. One is this idea that they have been building up Tony Stark as this mentor figure for Spider-Man, right? And so it's not uncommon in storytelling, not that it's good or not, it's simply a tool that is used a lot, is the idea that they take the mentor figure and they sacrifice them as a catalyst for a character in a story, right? In this case, you have that happen, but it's just delayed from what you would normally see. Instead of it happening, in Fellowship of the Ring, for example, where it happens in the first film, and then you have Frodo trying to figure out what is he supposed to do with his life and how should he take steps forward. In this case, it happens three-ish movies, four-ish if you want to count Civil War, into knowing who Peter Parker is, right? So it's a little more maybe disjointed because that happens at the very end of the last film that he was in, Avengers Endgame. And then it starts as like this impetus for how Tom Holland's character Peter Parker is reacting. And I think that in some ways it makes sense as a reaction to that, right? This big figure who he looked up to, that he really was inspired by, who he wanted to be like, is now dead. And he is struck with the gravity of the situation, right? And so you go from this character who has progressed more and more in saying, I want to be a superhero. I want to be part of the team. I want to advance and excel and grow in this role. And then he sees the consequences of that and goes, I don't know that I necessarily want that sacrifice. And he wants to pull back. It doesn't mean that he isn't rejecting his powers outright, but he's saying, I just want a normal life as a safe haven, if you will, from the life that he had just been culture shocked out of, right, if you will. So that was the impression that I felt like they were going for in this film, and I thought that background wasn't poorly set up based off of both the first Super Spider-Man film and the Avengers Endgame film.
So I have several points on why I think it's a problem, and I'll just go through them one by one because I think at this point I want to just take the stance of I don't like it, and we'll see where you go, like defending it, just for the sake of the audience here to flush this out.
Sure.
So one, I think in order for a character's motives to be compelling, I think the audience needs to be able to empathize with them. And so it's same thing for a villain, right? This is why Vulture was so compelling, is because you can empathize with his character. You can understand why he does what he does.
I'm not going to make a big issue out of it. I do disagree that the villains have to have the same thing. Cue the
I think
Joker,
the best
but
villains you can empathize with. The Joker, I think, is an anomaly in that he's like, there's always going to be exceptions to any rule, right? You bring up the Joker. The Joker is good because he is just chaos incarnate, and he is like the perfect counter to Batman. So, like, I will agree the Joker breaks that rule. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
That wasn't the point of what I was saying. I was just making a small note. I want that we've actually had these types of discussions around the villains multiple times, and we'll probably have it again, maybe in another Movies Worth Watching episode where we just talk about villains, because there is so much complexity around them, and they're great. One of my favorite topics. But for the sake of Peter Parker not getting too off track, continue on.
Sure. So by this point, we have to assume that Peter Parker has lived through Uncle Ben's death. Keep in mind, Aunt May dying in No Way Home and telling Peter Parker that with great power comes great responsibility is not a thing yet. So as far as the audience is concerned, Uncle Ben is the one who told him this. And then Uncle Ben dies, and it's Peter Parker's fault, and it's the same type of backstory we got with Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. Second, the Vulture's criminal empire, the alien invasion with Thanos, and then Tony Stark knighting him. So he's already at this point in the audience's minds had to come to terms with the idea that he has been given an immense amount of responsibility, and he has a lot of power over certain, like, he can put up a fight with Thanos. He can put up a fight with aliens. He's not someone to be laughed at this point, even though he may not be the best fighter. The refusal for him to engage with these elemental forces, to me as the audience member, reads less like he's wrestling with this idea of I want to be a teenager, and more like willful negligence, which makes it harder for, I think, the audience to empathize with him as a character because he's seen what happens when people stand by and do nothing. And he understands that Tony Stark's dead now. Captain America's gone. Black Widow's dead. Characters, and Nick Fury like tells him these people are off world. We can't, like, you're the only person we've got. And he still tells him, I don't want to help. Which just, it makes it so hard for me as an audience member to actually empathize with his actions because it reads as him just being irresponsible and negligent with the gravity of his experience and his abilities.
So do you want me to reply to each point as you go through them?
Yeah, because
Okay, okay. Yeah.
yeah,
I actually do disagree with this, and I think that it plays perfectly into who Spider-Man is because one, you have to keep in mind he is a teenager, right? He's gonna be hormonally adjusted to this idea of I want to find love and all these other things. And so the idea that he has flaws isn't inherently a bad thing. Second off, I don't think that the tension at the beginning of the film is super strong. That being said, the thing that they do establish well at the beginning is the fact that while they're not losing to the elements, Spider-Man really isn't doing a lot to stop them. It's all Mysterio. And so when you see Mysterio taking these actions and Spider-Man, he does take action when they're, in France and going or wait, that was France, right? Anyways,
I was Italy, and then they were
oh,
in
Italy, sorry, yeah.
Prague.
They were gonna go to France and then they don't. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, when they were in Italy and they're in the canals, right? And you see Spider-Man jump into action as soon as he sees this threat, and he offers his help to Mysterio, and he goes to help save the day. What he basically does is help mitigate damage and people getting hurt, which is not a bad thing, but he doesn't actually do anything to really stop the elemental, in his opinion. And you get that somewhat from the discussions that they have. You have a little pat on the back from Mysterio, but other than that, he's not really getting feedback saying you are actually an asset here. And that's how he sees it. He goes, I'm on this trip. I'm not really being helpful anyways. Let the A team take care of this because I'm clearly a B list when it comes to this threat. And so he figures I might as well go on my trip anyways because I want to and I want a break. Is it somewhat emotionally driven? Sure, it definitely is. He's a teenager and he's doing his teenager stuff and he wants to talk to the girl that he's interested in. Does that make him not relatable or not human? I don't think so. I think it might be a poor decision on his part, but it doesn't mean that it's an unrealistic one, something we can't understand as audiences.
See, I think I just find it hard to buy that. It's going back to the idea that it's not just negligent. It's like, I think, a regression for his character because you have to keep in mind that he's been gone for 5 years. So in those 5 years he's been gone, it's like his entire character is put on hold. So the last decision we see him make in regards to his trip is he's on a field trip with them and he sees Tony Stark needs his help in a distance. The Spider-Man we see in Far From Home would have said, Tony Stark's got this, I can leave it alone. But instead, he follows him into space after Iron Man tells him to stay behind and insists
Yeah.
on following him.
Yes.
Then he comes back, and only a few months later, now he's all of a sudden in love with MJ, which I also find that the whole B plot to me felt very contrived from the beginning, but we'll get to that later. But I don't buy that his character in just the span of like a few months has regressed so far after everything he went through.
But that's the whole point. The whole point is that Tony Stark was the figure in his life that he aspired to be, and his death was significant enough that he is pulling back as a person and saying, "Hold on, am I taking the right actions?" Because this figure that I thought was basically unstoppable was destroyed in the process. So I just don't. I think that that's a very reasonable reason for Peter Parker to take a very different approach moving forward into this film. Now, that being said, there isn't necessarily, and this is to playing the devil's advocate to your side a little bit more, there isn't necessarily the focus as much on the trauma around Tony Stark's death in regards to choosing to stay with his friend on the trip, right? All of that is focused around the B plot, that necessarily, and his love for MJ rather than specifically his concerns around Tony Stark. That still can make sense because you don't necessarily explain your trauma right off the bat. But some people might disagree. Anyways, I think there's nuance there, and I think that the nuance was appropriate. I don't think that it's unreasonable to assume that Tony Stark would be something he just bounces back from as a 16-year-old kid.
Sure. I don't think there's any point in the film where we really get this idea that he's running away because of Tony Stark's death. We get the implication in the film, and I think if we did get the implication it's because of Tony Stark's death, I might actually buy into it. We get the implication he's running away because of MJ. And he even voices this, like, there's a girl I want to ask out. And Quentin Beck's like, why do you want to run? And we have like this moment where Peter Parker's like, oh, why do I? And he's like, well, there's this girl I want to tell her how I feel. And it's like, when he finally gets to Iron Man, all he says is, I'm never going to live up to him, which feels more of something you'd say along the lines of like, you've been trying to fill his shoes and it's not working, rather than him telling Happy, like, I can't be Iron Man. I'm never going to fill his shoes. And not necessarily like, when I talk to Sean, he always says, do you want someone to like look in the camera and tell them I'm sorry? That sort of thing. I don't think you need to do that. But I think that there needs to be some sort of implication in the film that that is the thing that's driving him here. Even if it comes later, it doesn't need to be at the beginning to give us that kind of impression. But we need to know why that's the reason why. And I think the problem is that the impression we're actually given is just he's a hormonal teenager and he's emotional and he likes this girl. And because of that, he's willing to throw all of his responsibilities down the drain.
Sure. I mean, I would actually argue the discussion on the plane with Happy somewhat proves that that was a motive for him around Tony Stark. But let's just I'm gonna take a step back and say, let's just assume that your premise is right, that he is being a hormonal teenager, and that's the reason that he's taking these actions. I don't think that inherently makes him a bad character. I think it makes him a clearly flawed character, but I don't think that makes him just absolutely garbage that no one can relate to.
Well, sure. I think okay, and so this is where the first movie comes into play, because this is the second movie in a trilogy, which means you need to be progressing the character's story. I think Homecoming does a better job of having this dynamic between him still having desires as a teenager and having the responsibilities that he's brought upon himself as Spider-Man. And you have that in the instance where he has to decide between pursuing the girl's father or going to the dance with her. You have that in the instance where he has to choose between pursuing these gang members or going to the swimming pool with this girl. You have several instances where he's given the opportunity to choose between the two, and he chooses the latter.
Mm-hmm.
And he like ends up paying for it. Now, to give you the benefit of the doubt, you could say he learned from that and went, okay, well, I don't like the way that played out, so I'm going to pursue the girl this time. The problem with that becomes I don't buy the relationship with MJ and Peter from the get-go in this film. It felt very, very forced. And so then that becomes the problem for me there.
So you're saying that all of his motivations come from a unstable foundation because it's based on a B plot that you think is shallow.
Yes. I don't think MJ couldn't function as a compelling character in this film. I think the fact that they start off immediately with the idea that he's had like this obsession for months and we literally saw none of that is I don't buy it. I don't buy this idea, especially since Homecoming happens fairly like it's fairly recent in the timeline before Infinity War, and then this happens only a few months after, and they've both presumably, as far as we know, have both disappeared during the Thanos snap.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just like it felt very contrived. Their relationship. I think MJ's character was more developed in this film, but I don't know that their relationship was something that I thought was developed well.
I mean, I think that the B plot is a whole other thing. I'm trying not to get into that right now because I'm trying to stay
Sure.
with Peter. But I see where you're going with it. I just fundamentally don't think that it invalidates Peter Parker as a compelling character. I do think going back to, and this is where my struggle was in regards to Peter Parker, is I think the themes and what they're trying to get out of this film was a little more maybe trite and basic compared to what we got from previous films, and that shows in the development, right? And you know that because of the talking points that you're saying are the same talking points that are reiterated over and over in the film, right? You have him saying, oh, I want to be with MJ. Oh, I want to be with MJ. Oh, I want to be with MJ over and over again. And then he also keeps saying, Tony Stark is dead. Crap. Oh my gosh, Tony Stark is dead. Like, that is what he is saying over and over again. And so, while it has these dynamics, it's not like you get much insight into them other than the simple development with Quentin Beck, where they're in the bar and he says, I can't live up to this name, right? Which I will agree, that line kind of felt like it came out of left field and was supposed to be this revelation about what he was thinking, but his actions didn't necessarily thoroughly reflect that one. And so overall, I'm saying that they had a decent foundation for the ideas that he was representing. He had good flaws, he had good motives for where he was at. I thought it was interesting that you had this character that developed in his, oh, I want to be a superhero. And then he regresses a bit as he realizes his mentor figure is dead. And he doesn't know if he really wants to be the same superhero that he aspired to be previously, right? And that's the struggle of this film. The problem is they present you with that scenario, and that scenario pretty much stays static until he gets on the plane with Happy and decides, nope, I'm going to be the superhero again. So I think that was where my issue with the film came along, but I thought the foundation itself wasn't insecure.
So I'm actually not going to disagree with you here. I had like a list of 8 problems I had with Parker's character. This was one of
Mm-hmm.
them. And yeah, I agree. I think also you have to ask like about the motivating factors here, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Peter Parker and the way he reacts to things. I will say it's a little interesting, right, to have a Spider-Man that is more reactive than active in a film. I just don't. I didn't enjoy it as much the way that it was executed, and I think that the fact that the entire film he doesn't change, and it's almost like when we talked in episode 8 about how there are characters who will not have arcs; they'll have a switch flip, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
an immediate change for them, and you don't see a progression. You just see them go from one end of the spectrum to the other. And I think that's what happened with Peter Parker in this film was he went from, I want nothing to do with this. I want to stay away. I need to stop. And then the second MJ gives him the projector, he goes, oh, you're right. I definitely need to go see Nick Fury and change things and fix things. Which is like, I guess to play the devil's advocate, you could say in his mind, no one else could take on this responsibility. Which I think could have value to it. But I think at the same time, if you're really pushing for this Peter Parker who just wants nothing to do with it, he would just say, well, Nick Fury will figure it out because Nick Fury is Nick Fury.
Sure. I mean, yeah, maybe that's not developed the best, but there could be motivations around that of, oh, I am actually responsible for this now because I just gave him all of this weaponry by giving him the
Sure.
glasses. So I I don't know that it's fully invalidated by what you said, but sure, I would say that there is some level of it changes very quickly from there as he realizes that he's responsible. And then he has that conversation with Happy and he says, you know what? Fine, I'm going to be my own version of
Yeah.
Iron Man and make my suit and all of that cool
Well, I
stuff.
think that's the other thing too is like even in the world in which they've created the Peter Parker they've established, I don't think it doesn't feel like he's doing it for the reasons he ought to, other than he's just I don't know. Hold on. Let me rephrase this.
Hmm.
It feels like the Peter Parker we've grown accustomed to in this film would just call Nick Fury at that point and give him Happy's. encoded message and have him deal with it. But in this instance, he feels like once he finds out his group is in London and his friends are there, then that makes more sense for him to get involved, because up until that point, he had been actively trying to protect them from calamity. And so it's like, okay, at that point, it's understandable. But he was going to go and fight Mysterio even before he knew that. And so for me, I just don't find it believable that he has such a massive shift without a motivator like his friends being in danger.
Yeah, well, and I think there's some idea of guilt, right? And what does guilt play in the mind of Peter Parker? And you know that because you see the look on his face when he sees the projector and sees what it is and realizes, oh shoot, I messed up. But that's the only indication you get for him moving forward and suddenly being a strong actor in the rest of this film. And so to just say that that is what's pushing him, what's driving him to be a active character in this film is sure questionable. I think of all of the things, and I like Mysterio, right? I think Mysterio is a very interesting villain, but that one section where the switch flips, if you will, where the entire script does a 180 on what's going on, that part does feel disjointed. And I remember that from the first time I watched the film. And that's probably where a lot of this dissonance is coming in, is that section itself changes everything. And for Peter Parker, it's not entirely clear how that meshes with the world that he's been living in and even who he was previously as Spider-Man.
I think just as a final note on his character, I personally think, like, when I have a problem with a film, I try to present a solution so that people don't look at me and just go, oh, he's just complaining. Like, what would you have done differently? I think for
Mhm.
me, having a Peter Parker in this film that's almost the reluctant hero, and more explicitly so because of Iron Man's death, as opposed to MJ being the driving factor, would have made him a much more compelling character to me. Um, because the whole movie, every time he explains why he doesn't want to, is I'm on a class trip. I have my friends. I have MJ. There's this girl I like. Now, maybe it's revealed that though it wasn't the real reason all along later, and he was just using that as a facade, that'd be different. But I just don't get that the reason he's staying away is because of Iron Man's death. It's more like he's staying away because of MJ, and Iron Man's death is kind of just this looming question in the back of his mind.
Yeah, and I think that that's the thing. Like, I think that that's there. I think that it's legitimate that Tony Stark is a motivating factor for him. But I would also agree that it's hard to make that the primary motivation for him and how he's acting in this film if they're explicitly stating that MJ is the reason the entire time. And then they're subtly
Yes.
saying it might be Tony Stark. And then they never do really have a discussion that says, no, it was Tony Stark the entire time. This MJ thing was just an excuse, right? They never really say
Yeah.
that in this film. So I see what you're saying with that, and sure, I mean, it's definitely not a break it for me. I see that it's a pretty significant issue for you. I still think he's a compelling character in this film, and I think overall it's established fairly well. I just don't think his development is phenomenal in this film compared to previous ones.
Yeah. I think also in points in regards to his character, I think his most compelling moments are in when he's in direct conflict with Mysterio,
Hmm.
um, which we can get to when we talk about Mysterio. But I think what makes him the most compelling is not his interactions with Nick Fury or MJ or any other character. It's when he's in conflict with Mysterio specifically. So I don't think he's not compelling at all. I think it's just, to me, it feels disjointed. And I don't think that the start and the setup of his character was done in a satisfactory way for myself.
Yeah. No, and that's fair. What are your thoughts on Quentin Beck while we're starting to get him involved in this discussion? Do you think that Mysterio is a compelling villain, and why or why not?
I think Vulture was more compelling as a character.
Mhm.
I think Mysterio is more compelling in the sense that he's able to get Peter Parker to question everything. So his villain persona, I think, is more interesting than the Vulture persona. I don't think he's more interesting than Adrian Toomes, though, versus Quentin
Hmm.
Beck. So I just
Yeah,
want to make that clear.
I'd agree with that 100%.
I think I found it weird that he's been giving these like explanations for everything that are so corny the entire movie, and Nick Fury buys all of it, and then the second we as the audience know he's making it up, when he tells Nick Fury goes, "Now that's just a load of BS." Um, I was just like, why didn't he figure that out sooner? If like this isn't any different than what he's been saying previously. He told them it would draw power from the Earth's core. He told them there was a fire one and all these different elementals that destroyed his planet. Um, so that's just like a side note I thought was it's like now that we as the audience know, Nick Fury suddenly figures it out. Go
We'll
ahead.
get to him, but yes,
Yes. I know he's the villain. I will say I do wish they made him more convincing leading up to his reveal. Um,
what do you mean?
even I think even aside from me knowing that Mysterio was a villain, because going into this the first time I
Hmm.
watched this movie, I was not sure what they were going to do with Mysterio. When I saw that he was fighting along Peter, for the very first time he appeared on screen, I thought, oh, maybe they're going to have a Mysterio who's actually a good guy. Um, the second he has that whole conversation with Peter Parker, it was like, nope, this is just straight up villain Mysterio. I didn't feel like his narrative he was building was compelling enough to actually call into question whether or not he was truly a villain in this film. I think they were trying to go for this idea of like maybe Mysterio is good in this film and he turns evil by the end of it, which I think is interesting, right? To have a villain that you try to like show their progression to becoming more and more like devolving.
Yeah, and we
But
saw that in Doctor Strange, for example.
yeah, wait, who are you referring to? Or the
Uh,
first movie you mean, Carl
yes, the first
Mordo?
one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, I thought you were talking about Multiverse of Madness. And I was like, what on earth?
No, 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 no.
But I just think his narrative just felt too corny, and they were like going for this bit where it was like people need to believe in something, and right now they'll believe anything, and like telling Peter Parker like I also just didn't know what the point of that message was. Like, was the message like the world has changed, you should change too? Um, I personally did not find that message or theme very compelling or interesting. It also felt like very delayed, like it didn't come up until the end of the movie.
Yeah, you mean like at the very end when he's having the face down and he's about to get, I mean, he's dying and he says that to him.
Yeah.
You're talking about that scene?
Yeah. I
Yeah,
will say
that's
also, by the way, I'm
mhm.
talking Quentin Beck versus Mysterio because I wanna separate those two personas. And so I'm just focusing on the scenes with him as Quentin Beck rather than Mysterio.
Got it. Okay. I
So
mean, yeah, his dialogue's okay. It's definitely not my favorite, and I noted that. I'm a little bit of a stickler for dialogue, but it's not a killer thing, right? We talked about that in Star Wars Episode 4 and other films where the dialogue might be corny, it might be trash, but the storyline itself doesn't always suffer because of it. It can, but it doesn't always. In regards to the believability of Mysterio, yeah, it was definitely mid. I thought that Mysterio as a villain was very compelling in his dynamics, right? The idea of using technology to create these illusions, and and also the demonstration of that on screen was amazing. The idea that you enter Peter's world for a second, and he's completely surrounded by a world that's changing every second around him as he gets thrown through glass and then toppled by all of the structures around him, and then you see a massive army of Mysterios attacking him, right? All of these different things are messing with his mind because his eyes can't be trusted, right? And that was a whole other dynamic of Peter in this film is the idea of can his senses be trusted or does he have to use his Peter tingle to figure things out? And that is a dynamic that really wasn't developed in the previous one, his ability to sense things, and you see it a lot more in this film. So pretty decent on that side in regards to his conflict with the villain. But in regards to the villain himself, outside of that, is he compelling because they give him this big backstory? I mean, yeah, the backstory was probably the weaker part. I agree. Quentin Beck is not. Jake is a great actor, right? He plays the part well, but
Yeah.
the roles and lines that he was given to say weren't necessarily a strong character for the villain, and that's what you got in this film, anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I'd agree with that generally. His little monologue about everyone needs something to believe in, or they'll believe in anything nowadays.
It just
It's
felt like
it
they wanted to
what
give
it
him some epic final lines.
it was the motive for the villain or the mindset behind everything that he was doing. So it wasn't necessarily unreasonable for him to say it, but it was weird for him to be having this dialogue with Peter. Sure, I mean the dialogue, it was a mess for the villain. Sure, he was an actor and he was playing his theatrical part actually in the film, not like Jake playing it. Miss Quentin Beck was very much an actor doing actor things to convince people to believe in him. So I didn't have a problem with it, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you wanted to say
I
things on Mysterio specifically, or you just wanted to rant on Quentin Beck.
Mysterio specifically, I think, is just a very interesting villain in comparison to Spider-Man, right? Because Spider-Man is a very dynamic hero in the way that he fights. He
Hmm.
is very quick, agile, has to be extremely fast with his reaction times. And in order to do that, he has to be utilizing all of his five senses. Maybe not taste, but you get the idea.
Hmm.
Um, and so the second you strip him of those senses, he doesn't know how to react. And so I think one, it was a very interesting way to take his character, almost like they did in Iron Man 3, where you strip them of something essential to their superhero persona. Where Iron Man loses his suit of armor, and it's like, are you still the hero you were without it? Like, are you more than just the suit? And with Peter
Hmm.
Parker, it was like, what are you going to do? So taking away an essential piece of that and forcing him to grow through it. And then secondly, it enabled us to see probably one of the best iterations of his Spider-Man's spider sense in cinema.
Hmm.
I think that scene on the bridge is just done really, really well in the sense
Hmm.
that, like, the way it is animated and the way Spider-Man moves through it is like you can tell he's pushing through this bridge, and his movements and the way he reacts to things, it almost has like this negative space around it. Like you can tell where he is just by the way he's bouncing off of these invisible walls. Um,
Hmm.
so you get an image of that bridge regardless. Um, and even in the building, I think the scene when he goes back with Nick Fury and then it's all a fake, and then the way they have like layers to this that Mysterio has created, and just making Peter Parker question everything in his life is, I think, is done really well.
I guess. Yeah, I mean, all of that makes sense. I think at this point we should talk about losses that he's experienced, revelations that occur in this film, and like the climax overall. We talked
Yeah,
about the climax a little bit. How do you think the revelations of this film progress, his losses that he's experienced, and all of that trauma and revelation?
sure.
Do you want to go more in depth into what you think of those parts of the film?
I mean, I think we kind of covered the loss. I mean, when you think of the loss, right, you have like multiple layers to this. You have the way he begins the conflict, the way the conflict is heightened, and then you have the termination of that in the loss. I think this
Hmm.
film does things differently, and I don't know if I like it. We'll see what you think. I think the loss happens before the film even starts with Tony Stark's death, and that's the loss he's meant to suffer. The problem is he doesn't really suffer from it except for like the very opening shot where he's like looking at a mural of him and then the dialogue with Happy. But other than that, like I feel like that loss, for it to be a big driving force, needs to be something that kind of is drawn out through this film. Um,
Hmm.
in the 9 points, you have the question like, is there a compelling motive for the protagonist to be involved in the plot? I think this movie kind of turns that question on its head almost, because it's like he doesn't want to be involved in the plot.
Hmm.
And so he only is involved like pretty much out of necessity. Now I think the villain's compelling, and I think that his conflict with him there is good. Um, I think in terms of him like being thrown from a one situation to a worse one, is good. I just don't know that he. I don't know that I would say that, because the question you pose in the 9 points is, does he experience like this world shattering loss that cannot be reversed?
Hmm.
That, and the final point is that causes them to despair. I don't
Hmm.
know that Iron Man's death causes him to despair, even though it's the loss he's meant to suffer.
Well, yeah, and I actually put it differently in this film, which is why I see where you're coming from. That is more of the catalyst for where he's at in the film, in my mind. The real loss is it starts when the projector's taken off of one of the drones, right? And he realizes he's really screwed up. And it goes from there to he has this fight with Mysterio, and Mysterio beats the crap out of him and then has him hit by a train, right? In that scene, he realizes he's revealed all of his friends to Mysterio. They're all going to die. And then you see he's really messed up when Happy lands the plane and he goes, wait, wait, wait. You need to tell me something that only you would know because I need to know that you're not some fake apparition that Mysterio is making again. And that's where you see that he's just absolutely lost his mind and he thinks that he's really just ruined everything, right? And he doesn't even know what to do at this point. That was where I put the idea of having this world shattering loss. Is like everything that's come to this point has culminated in that. And this is the only time in the entire film, which is why I think it's pretty decent, that you actually have an intersection between the two motives that he has in this film, the one being with Tony Stark and the other being with his friends and his love interest, right, where they all come together in this idea that I have not only failed to take on the responsibilities that Tony Stark wanted me to take on, but this mentor figure that he actually wanted me to do this and I wasn't seeing it, and now I've really screwed the pooch. And then also he's basically destined his friends to die. So that idea I thought was pretty well developed because you see that now he's come to a point where he has royally screwed things up to the degree that he now has to take steps forward to change things. Because if he doesn't, everyone's going to die. That's where I put it, and I didn't give it full points. I gave it solid points though.
I put that more in the area of heightened tensions than losses, and I think that's just where we disagree on that point.
Sure.
Because I just, I guess for myself, I when I think of a loss for a character, it needs like think of it like an irreversible loss, because the losses you talk about, he can reverse in a sense, right? He can still save his friends, he can still salvage his relationship, he can still be a superhero. He isn't truly losing something that he can never get back. um and so that's why I put Iron Man down as the irreversible loss for him, because it is something he can't get back. Now, granted, the MCU may just bring Iron Man back, and I think as of recently they've confirmed they are going to recast characters like Iron Man and Captain America and Black Widow, because I think Kevin Feige said they're like James Bond for the MCU, where their characters always need to be around, but they're just going to have to find a new actor for them. Um, that said, I think in terms of irreversible losses that can't be reversed, or yeah, irreversible losses, I think Iron Man just in my mind fits that bill best.
Hmm. Yeah.
Even though, right, it's not even in this movie.
Interesting. Yeah, I think we'll have to disagree. I see where you're coming from though with that, and that's an interesting point to bring
Yeah.
up. It's not
And
an illegitimate point.
I think also in my mind, right, you compare it to the other two films we have, even though I mean you technically have reviewed both of them at this point, even though I don't think
Yeah.
I was on for the third one.
No.
In the first one, the irreversible loss is in his mind, he has lost the Stark internship, as he calls it. He's
Hmm.
lost the suit, he's lost his connection to Tony Stark. He's nothing. He's just going to go back to being a pathetic high schooler. And even though he has superpowers, he's never going to have the shot at being an Avenger. The third
Hmm.
movie, he loses his Aunt May. Both of those things, I think, function as these irreversible losses that do genuinely cause him to despair. And I think in my mind, that's why this film is probably the weakest for me. Is one, you have very static growth for his character. Two, I personally don't find his background in coming into this film the most compelling, even though it's like
Hmm.
I still gave this film a 6.7 or something. So it's something like 6.15. So it's still two-thirds of the points that it got, right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think if I were just to round up, I'd probably give it a 6.2. So it's still on the higher end. I think it's
yeah.
just I'm not the biggest fan of the background. I think his development's static. I don't think that the losses he suffers as a character. And the thing is, the reason the losses are so important, right, is because the losses often are the catalyst for change.
Right,
And so
right.
if you don't have a good catalyst for change, then your character ends up not being as compelling by the end. And so, right,
Well, and
that
also the whole
go ahead.
idea of this moment of loss is often the time that catalyzes this big change. And so when you're saying that he hasn't changed a lot, and part of that is because the losses that he experiences aren't as grave as the other films, that does make sense. It would check out more or less. Is that if you don't have a lever or a fulcrum, if you will, to leverage his change on, it's not going to be that drastic. Yeah, I'd agree with that. That makes sense.
So that those are my thoughts on like the losses, the heightened tension, and like the way the character interacts with the villain.
Yeah, and I did, just going in regards to the revelations as well. I did give it points for the revelations. I was doing it with some level of grace just because I understand. I know who Mysterio is, right? We had the big uh amalgam book of all of the different villains of Spider-Man when I was growing up, and Mysterio was the one I always turned to and said, "Oh, he looks kind of cool, even though he's got a fish tank for a head." And then they actually show him in the film. I knew instantly this guy's going to be a bad guy. But if you didn't know that, you might be surprised when he flips the switch and says, "Hey, I'm actually bad." So there's things like that that I tried to give it grace for, and they do try to have some interesting revelations in there in regards to like surprise endings. I gave it points for that mostly because of the revelation with the Alex Jones version of J. Jonah Jameson, who says, "By the way, we all know who Spider-Man is now. It's your boy Peter Parker," and then he freaks out, right? But
That is honestly hilarious because I did the exact same thing. Even though it's an end credit scene, in my mind, it's just a continuation of the movie because the movie ends with him saying, "I
Mhm.
have to go on a date," and then he takes MJ, and then the end credit scene is just the continuation of that, which I think is interesting too for an end credit scene because I don't think there's ever been something like that, at least up until that point. I could be wrong. I just am not remembering something at the moment. And so I considered that as like a surprise ending, right? It's this
Mhm.
massive twist where it's like Mysterio still got him in the end,
Mhm.
which creates a great segue into the third film because the third film picks up immediately where this one left off.
Yes. And in regards to giving someone the anticipation, the excitement of, "Oh my goodness, I want to see the next film," that was a great way to do it because it
Oh yeah,
automatically provides a baseline of new tension for the next film to jump off of. So, very good in regards to that.
well, also, I think this even goes back to our conversation about Across the Spider Verse and how you can have a cliffhanger at the end of a film while still completing a story's arc. Now, granted, I don't know
Right.
that this story's arc is the most compelling because it's more of like a sharp shift rather than an arc. But like, right, we talked about how Infinity War, you still have a cliffhanger at the end, and but you still have a completion to an arc, as opposed
Mhm.
to Across the Spider Verse being one that's more of the entire movie doesn't actually complete its arc. It like kind of crescendos and goes back up, and then the cliffhanger is just we haven't completed the arc.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
No, I agree. And it is a very different technique to take. Wasn't a huge fan of the ending for. Are we gonna get an Into the Spider-Verse 3? Do we know? It's been so long
uh
at this point.
I think basically like there's a bunch of drama around Shamik Moore and Haley Steinfeld, who were the co-stars for Gwen Stacy and Miles Morales. And there was a ton of drama. And then Shamik Moore like removed himself from social media, and we didn't know if we were going to get a new movie. I think the last thing I read was they're going to try to get one by like 2028 or something.
Oh, geez. Okay,
Um,
so it's Drama Fest that caused this. It's that why we haven't seen a new film from that. It's
he's
not
just a
that.
mini. He's just a mini Kanye, bro.
Oh wow. Oh,
No,
that's
okay,
a
not
that's a hot
literally.
take.
When I say mini Kanye, I just mean he's a drama queen. There's lots of drama in his life.
Mm,
Um,
okay.
he's not actually like just a straight up Nazi. That
I
would
thought that's
be
where you were going with it. I was like, holy
that would
crap,
be
I
an
didn't know
insane
that.
plot twist. Miles Morales is an aberration because he's actually a Nazi. You just see him
Yeah,
Heil Hitler by the end of the movie.
that'd be crazy.
Um,
Um,
so,
yeah.
anyways,
No, let's talk about the side characters at this point. I think we've gone through the film pretty well. We just have the side pieces to talk about. Obviously, let's start off with the one that you have the biggest issue with and the biggest character taking up space in this film. What are your thoughts on MJ?
all right. So first, I already talked about this. The relationship is just built off screen. Second, she feels more like a plot device than her own character. Now, I said earlier she's developed more than the first film, which is not that hard to do. I think she actually is. I don't know that this means that she's developed very well. She ends up being this character that like has these brief dialogues with Peter. Her affection for him feels very like just almost convenient because they don't actually have any interactions that are even implied that would show that she actually liked him. It's more like they just wanted to create these two awkward teenagers who happen to like each other from a distance, um, which just it's just made it so uncomfortable to watch sometimes. Like when the little it's like, what am I watching? Why does it look like he licked his face?
Yeah.
Um,
Um,
but yeah, I think her affections are just like abrupt. They're underdeveloped. Um, I think in general, the stakes for the relationship in terms of because remember, this as far as we know is the driving motivating motivator for Peter Parker's actions. The stakes in
right.
general for their relationship feel pretty low.
Hmm.
It's just like we're teenage drama, Disney Channel. Let's go. um, like I already said, she feels more like a plot device. And then the relationship resolution, like the way this whole thing is resolved, just feels so rushed. Like the end of the movie, it's like there's just so many switches that they just flip and they go, all right, we had this long drawn out session where Peter Parker was wanting to tell this girl about his feelings, and he was pissed off at a man named Brad who wasn't letting him do that and took pictures of him with a woman and almost killed him. But now that we're done with all that waste of time, we're just gonna Game of Thrones season 8 this.
I just took it. Now, maybe I shouldn't have, but I took it at face value. I assume that these are awkward teenagers, and maybe they did fall in love with each other from afar, and it's all just lovey-dovey, stupid stuff in their minds, saying, "Oh, I love this person, even though I don't really know them that well." And that's the hard thing to say is that they basically have next to no relationship at the end of the last film. And then in this film, they're supposed to have some sort of development between the two. But what it is, we don't really know because we didn't see it. And so and the difficulty with that is for the first 30 to 45 to an hour of the film, you don't actually see her interacting with him much at all. And so you get the impression that she's very aloof, right? She doesn't really care for him. And then she starts to be like, oh, I'm making a joke. I'm awkward. I love you. And then all of a sudden they want to smooch on screen. So yeah, I mean, that being said, I'm not much of a critic of romances, so it's like, all right, they fall in love, good enough. We'll give it a check mark.
Well, like the other thing that makes it
uh,
so weird to me, because you guys have already reviewed 3, which means I'm just going to give
mhm.
my thoughts on all 3 of these here and now because I wasn't there for that one. I just don't buy their relationship as being as deep as they want you to think it is, right? Because up until this point, we're given the impression there is no relationship until the end of the second film. The third film just blows it up and is like, oh, immediately following this film, they're like super close. She's super supportive. They're the best buds. And they only date for like a total of a few months and then she forgets about him. And it's like this massive catalyst in Peter Parker's life. He's like, oh, I just got out of the honeymoon phase and now it sucks. Um, it just felt like they wanted him to have this MJ-esque character, and it was just so contrived and forced, and they just, it's like, can we
Well,
not get a superhero who doesn't have motivations outside of a female co-lead? Like, do we have to have a romance for every superhero
superhero?
film?
Yes.
like that just frustrated me. It was like, I feel like this is a film where it would have made sense for him to just like you don't need to force the MJ relationship on
Sure.
him in some of these instances. Like, I'm not saying don't have it at all, right? I'm fine with it being a more of a minor B plot, but there are definitely some instances in this movie and the next movie, and even in the first one, where it was like, I don't think the movie needed that in order to do well. In some instances, I think it actually cost the films.
Yeah, well, in this case, your argument is that it does. And
Yes,
I think, I don't know. All I'm going to say about MJ is that she was unique from the other MJs we've seen, right? She was, or any of the other romances we've seen for Peter Parker, actually, in regards to she's actually this rather cold, stoic, really awkward person compared to these other lovey-dovey, oh my gosh, I love you so much, I'm gonna get super emotional right now, and then move on with their life. So I thought that I appreciated the attempt at the take. I'm not a huge fan of Zendaya generally. I especially don't like her in Dune, even though, ironically enough, she is actually built more for that role than this role. But that being said, I actually thought she did better in this role than some of the other roles that I've seen her in. So, uh, I don't know. I just took it at that and said, whatevs, and we're good.
sure.
That's
I
probably
think
enough
I
to say on her, unless you want to, like, keep
I mean,
saying how
not on
much you hate
her.
Zendaya.
I think for me, I don't know, maybe this is a difference between us that we haven't discussed, but I think I do enjoy, like, if a romance is done well, I think it can be done in a compelling way. And I don't like poorly written romances that are just like for contrived for the plot's sake, okay? Like, let's go to
You
Attack on
like,
Titan. Mikasa and Aaron's romance story, I think, is like so fire. And yet there's none of the traditional tropes within that of like the lovey-dovey, ooh, I love you. It's like Aaron's just like, leave me alone. Go do your job. But
mhm.
Mikasa, the entire show and series, is struggling with these feelings she has for him. And then at the end, he tells her all those feelings are just genetics. You were programmed that way. And so that's another struggle for her too.
Mhm.
But I think there are definitely movies where a romance can be written well. Like, I think Gladiator
No,
is another good example of this, right? Even though the romance doesn't really exist, Gladiator 2 kind of screws with this. But for the first Gladiator movie, his wife dies, and this is a driving force for him. And it's a very like
sure, sure.
organic, romantic relationship that is implied. Even though it's done off screen, it's just it is done well. So, anyways,
You love a good plot twist with a romance, huh?
I think romance, the thing is it's such a base human desire to have connection with someone. And so utilizing romance as a subplot or a motivator for a character is a very real one that audiences can easily get behind, if that makes sense. Um,
Yeah. I mean, that's why I got behind this one.
well, I mean, I guess you can eat dirt too. It'd be awkward.
Okay. Anyways, we're gonna move on now. Let's talk about Happy and his Aunt May. What are your thoughts on that dynamic in this film? And this doesn't have to be long, but I think you should make some honorable mention on this one.
Happy, best character in this film. I'm not even lying to you, bro. First of all, absolute Chad. He is taking care of Peter in Tony's absence. He, I think, of all the characters, actually shows the impact that Tony's death had on him throughout the
Hmm.
film. It is
Hmm.
actually a driving motivator for him. And he
Hmm.
sees Spider-Man, Peter Parker, as the next Iron Man. And unlike with Iron Man, he sees it as his responsibility to make sure that Peter Parker can take hold of this responsibility and run with it. And he's the one that tells Peter, no one could live up to Tony. Not even Tony could. You're not going to be Iron Man. That's not your goal here. Your goal is to protect others, right? Be the superhero that Iron Man knew you could be. Be better than Tony. So one, I think he is like, I think of all the movies Happy's in, this might be one of his best appearances, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Two, bro bagged an absolute baddie, like GD Chad. Okay, first of all, if you can pull that Aunt May, that's insane.
Okay.
And then also just his interactions with Peter throughout the film, like the little hints that they're like a thing, and Peter's just like, what's going on? What is this?
Yeah.
Like that whole bit with him and Aunt May is just done so well, and it's so funny. And it's done in a natural way too, right? Happy up until this point, we have never seen a love interest for him. And for it to be Aunt May is kind of like, oh, what on earth? But okay, I'm kind of here for it. And you can kind of see, like, it's interesting, right? Uncle Ben, we're assuming, has been dead for a while now. So Aunt May at this point is probably moved on. At least in terms of like being willing to see other people. So it's not like she's living in this past. I do think Aunt May, the opening of it being that she's like working with Peter as Spider-Man, is an interesting one, because the last film we ended with her being like, what on earth? And so that was like, it wasn't bad per se, like it's still believable. And she's still very much the motherly figure that she was, but it's like she's adapted to this, right? Especially after the events of Endgame and Infinity War. It's probably like she kind of sees this and she's like, you know what? You are actually have superpowers. Iron Man trusted you enough. I think if he had faith that you could handle yourself, I should probably support you and do what I can to make sure you're able to accomplish those goals. And she's the one who's pushing him to be Spider-Man, right? She still sneaks his suit into his suitcase. And the TSA lady's like, okay, well, somebody likes to dress up. Okay, take your suitcase. And so, like, I think her character is very consistent. I don't think she really needs to change in this film at all, right? She's just I still think, again, I think this is still the best iteration of May we get, because she's still her own character, has her own motivations, her own desires throughout the film, and has her own little, almost like arcs. Like, right, this one, she has her whole thing with Happy. And the next one, we find out they broke up. And Peter's like, what? No. And Happy's like, yes, dang it. And then she dies. And I know we're not going to review that one, but I do think her death is quite apt. And I think it functions as a great catalyst for Peter to get pushed to the point he does, where he's like, just erase knowledge of me from everyone. Because she was the one person he let in, right? It was only Aunt May, Happy, MJ, and Ned. Those were the four people that knew. And in his mind, right, Happy was always going to know, because Happy's part of the Avengers, right? But there's the three people closest to him, Aunt May, MJ, and Ned. And Aunt May dies because somebody knew his identity. And so it's like, you know what? It makes it a very compelling catalyst to push him to action, where he's like, you know what? For the sake of those around me, I can't have anybody know my identity. Which, I'm going to be honest, is going to make his character, if they do it right, would make his character so interesting for future relationships, making his Peter Parker like so hesitant to tell people, right? Because with MJ, he's just like, oh, I am Spider-Man. After like, he like caves almost under no pressure when she shows him the little projector.
The projector,
yeah. And with Aunt May, right, he's like walking around in the apartment with his suit on and the door open. And then with Ned, he like doesn't check his bed. It's like he's less aware of his surroundings. Whereas we're gonna if they do in the way they should, we're probably gonna get a Peter Parker who's a lot more paranoid about people finding out his secret identity, and any relationship he's in future movies is gonna be like, it's gonna be a massive sticking point where it will probably cause those relationships to suffer, and we'll get to see the Peter Parker kind of struggling with, how do I keep these relationships alive? Because I care about them, and because I care about them, I can't tell them what I do and that I'm Spider-Man.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they take him for sure. And I agree with all those thoughts on Aunt May and Happy. The only thing I would add is it's interesting to see how Peter assumes that Aunt May is going to absolutely freak out when she finds out his identity. Turns out she's actually the cool aunt and is like, "Oh, I'm just totally going to support you in this. Let's go raise some money. Follow me," and then they have the whole thing going on with between her and her nephew. So, absolutely goated Aunt move. And
Oh yeah,
it
you
was
you
like it
just
was great to see he
know.
had expectations that were totally wrong.
Yeah, you just know she's the goated aunt.
Yeah, 100%.
You
Yeah.
you know that if like his parents were alive, he'd still be best friends with his Aunt May.
Oh, facts. Yeah. What are your thoughts on? I think the only main one, because I mean Ned is just a humor piece in this one. Some of the other characters are just funny. I don't know that they're worth having a full on discussion on. The only one I think that really needs to be noted is Nick Fury. What are your thoughts on Nick Fury in this film?
I had my doubts about him going into this film, or the way that he played out, like the actions he took. And I think they kind of explain it away by showing that it's actually Talos. He's a scroll. I have my biggest problem is probably with that at that point, because it's like I can't really have problems with the way Nick Fury acted because it wasn't even Nick Fury. So my problem is just
Hmm.
that it wasn't Nick Fury to begin with. Um, and I think that just plays into the fact that they were doing too much at this point in the MCU, right? Phase 4 and 5
Hmm.
just became absolute jokes in terms of how much they're trying to put in there, because they, right? The reason Endgame, and this is getting more into like the overall impact of these films. So I may be
Right.
jumping the gun, but I think
No,
it's
that's
appropriate
perfectly
at this
fine. We were
point.
going to go into that next anyways. So
Yeah.
go ahead.
So I think the problem is phases 4 and 5 saw how good the third movie was. And it's like you had this phenomenal like roast that you'd been marinating for days, or you had this bottle of wine that was from like 1950 or something. Like it's aged. You have so much time to set it up. And with Endgame and Infinity War, you had over a decade's worth of films with foreshadowing and little things that had been built up to this villain, right? With Thanos and the Infinity Stones and Loki and all of these players that are coming together and building up what different superheroes exist in this universe. And it's like they wanted that high immediately after without any of the work that went into it. And so they're just pushing all of these things into films with um, Kang the Conqueror, and then you have MODOK, and now you have the Skrulls and Secret Invasion, and they're going to try to do Secret Wars now to reset the universe. And then you have Eternals, just like, oh, we've got Celestials, we've got the Eternals, and we're going to have 10 main characters in one film. Then you've got Shang-Chi, which we still have no idea what's going on with him. And then you got She-Hulk and Moon Knight and the Loki show. And I don't think all of them were bad, because I think Loki was a good show. I think Moon Knight was decent. You got the What If show, right? 3 seasons of just absolute what is this fever dream.
Right.
I'm sure I'm missing some shows here, right? I mean, I think I mentioned She-Hulk. She-Hulk was another one where it's like the end they introduce Hulk's son at like an end credit scene, and you're like, hello, cool,
Hmm.
wow, okay. And so
Hmm.
it's like I didn't like that it wasn't Nick Fury, because I think it's another instance of where they're just trying to like just fit as much stuff into films as possible to just build up to this epic conclusion so much quicker, rather than just going, all right, you know what? We had a massive world-ending event. We're going to let things settle down. And like the first 1 or 2 movies, right? Just show how the world is readjusting to this. Show our heroes try to find their place in this new world, right? A world where Iron Man is dead and Captain America's gone and Black Widow's gone. 3 of the main staples for the Avengers just are no longer players on the board anymore.
Hmm.
Like that's what the battle against Thanos and for the universe cost us, was the people who started these superhero teams, really, right? I mean, technically Captain Marvel and the Guardians existed before that, but the point is Earth didn't know about them. In the terms of Earth's POV, these are the characters that started it all. Um, and then you even have Hawkeye, who's like pretty much gone into retirement. So you've got Thor and Hulk, who we kind of get to see them, and I think their
And
movies and the
Ant-Man.
shows. Oh yeah, true. And Ant-Man. Although Ant-Man wasn't one of the ones that started them. I'm talking about like the original 6
Oh, the
Avengers,
original
right?
Avengers. Gotcha.
Because we
Okay.
get Guardians 3 still, and then we get the next Doctor Strange, which covers Scarlet Witch 2. We get WandaVision. So like we still see all these other characters showing up again. I think they're just trying so hard to have like each of them have their own world-ending event to try to top Endgame and their own individual films. And I will say, I think that's one of the reasons this film still got a 6.1. I'd probably give it a 6.2 at this point. From me, because they didn't go for this world-ending event, right? Mysterio isn't going to conquer the world. He can't do
Hmm.
that because the Avengers still exist. He's more
Right.
just looking for overall notoriety, and he wants to become the next Iron Man and fight alongside the Avengers. Now, how that would have
Right.
actually played out, I don't know if he really thought that far ahead. He's a bit of a narcissist.
Right.
Um, the point is it was still a localized event to Europe, right? They were more. They still caused a lot of damage. Don't get me wrong, but it wasn't like Mysterio was going to blow up the planet. Whereas like Multiverse of Madness, it's going to destroy the entire universe. The multiverse is at threat. Thor the Dark World. Gore the God Butcher is killing every single god in existence. You've got WandaVision. Oh no, Wanda is turning reality into something it's not. Which ones I'm forgetting? Eternals. The entire planet is going to get eaten by a celestial. Like I could go on. They
Hmm.
went from these more localized, right? Because at the beginning of
And you even got
the
that with the new Fantastic Four film with
true, yeah. See,
Galactus. Yeah.
the trend continues. It's like we've moved past these, right, and we talked about this, I believe, in the was it the Fantastic Four movie? I think it was. You have to set a baseline for these conflicts. Otherwise, there's no way to make the conflicts more compelling or interesting. If you start with a world-ending event in the first of 3 movies, how are you going to go anywhere from there, right? You can't
Hmm.
get bigger than that. It's like
Yeah.
Multiverse of Madness is we're going to destroy the entire multiverse. I don't know how
Right.
you get any bigger than that. Now I will say probably the exception for this in my mind was Loki, because we're exploring something completely new, and I think it was actually done in an impactful way, right? And it was done well. But you're not really getting anywhere bigger than that with Loki, right? And the show ended. So it's like, okay, with Loki, we started with something more minor and we moved to that by the end of the 2nd season. Whereas these other movies and trilogies are just starting with that. And then you even look back at the original Marvel films. Iron Man 1, who was the villain? Obadiah Stane. Was he going to blow up the planet? No, he was just going to take over Stark Industries. Um, I think, Hulk, right? Abomination didn't want to destroy the planet. He just wanted to fight Hulk. Thor,
Hmm.
was it about Asgard getting destroyed? No, it was the story of his brother usurping power.
Hmm.
Um, the only one where you could argue it was like a world-ending threat is Captain America, and that's because World War II, nuclear bombs, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
Um, but even that it just made sense, right? It's World War II. It's a historical event. And they were still able to build from there, right? Because it wasn't like he was going to annihilate everyone on the planet. He was going to blow up major hubs. And then they moved it up a notch with the second movie, where we're not just blowing up major hubs, we're taking out every person on the planet who could oppose us.
Hmm.
And then the third one, right? It's not we're taking out people, we're going to take out the protectors of those people. Um, and so, I mean, even Civil War,
Hmm.
right? It's
Yeah.
not a world-ending threat.
Right.
Anyways,
And that one's
I've gone
yeah.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
long
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
enough. But you get my point, right? At this point in the films, in phases 4 and 5, they're just doing so much and shoving so much in there. So when it comes going full circuit here, when it comes back to Nick Fury, I think the inclusion of the Skrulls here, and then playing that into Secret Invasion, and then the revelation that like War Machine hasn't been War Machine since like Civil War, is just like this weird, insane plot twist that was so contrived. Um, I think the Skrulls are interesting. I just don't think it was a good time to tell that arc.
Yeah. I simply took it as they were trying to weave a side plot in to further develop something they were taking on later, right? And I will say, for all things of this, it reflects more poorly knowing the rest of the universe and where it went and where it's going to continue to go. right? With this super cataclysmic, over the top dynamics going on for each of the different characters and the threats that they're facing. It's a little extreme and it gets repetitive to a certain degree because a world ending threat can only happen so many times before you predict that the heroes are going to win again and no
Yeah.
one's going to die. Cue Sue Storm. But in regards to this specific one, I didn't have a big issue with it because it was pretty subtle. And they did hint it fairly well throughout the entire film that it wasn't Nick Fury, right? From the very first time where they have the discussion between Spider-Man, Quentin, Beck, and Nick Fury, and Spider-Man's looking for alternatives, he says, "What about Captain Marvel?" And he says, "Don't invoke her name." I don't think Nick Fury gives a crap if someone invokes Captain Marvel's name. But the fact that Nick Fury says that is a little tell that you go, okay, this is not normal. Why is this not normal? Well, it turns out it's not actually Nick Fury. So, things like that I actually appreciated. I didn't think it was a big deal. But the fact that they took things like that and they were trying to make something super epic that has just devolved as the multiverse universe of Marvel has progressed is a bad sign. And so, is this specifically a bad thing? I don't think so, but it's a broader sign of them doing too much that they continue to do with the rest of the universe that did actually significantly hurt them. So
Yeah.
that's where we're at. Is this film specifically bad? No. Does it have signs for bad things to come for the rest of the MCU? Yeah, it does. And it turns out it did. So that's what you got. And I think that's probably a good place to end it. So that's the
Yeah. I mean,
pod.
I don't have any more thoughts. So
Cool. Well, hope you all enjoyed. We'll be back as we always are next week. We hope to see you all then.